Hi, everyone. Welcome to the evening sessions of day 2 of the Culturally Competent Conversations for Equity and Belongingness Summit. And we cannot have culturally competent conversations without including the voices and perspectives of the first peoples whose stolen land that all of us are living on here in America. So this is going to be an incredibly powerful presentation. And this is actually a little bit of a different format because when we did this, our expert speaker, Jordann Lankford-Forster, whose Native American name is Bright Trail Woman, couldn't actually fit this into her schedule, where the summit was going. But it was so important to include her voice that she did a pre-recorded session. Then we ended up expanding the timing of the C3EB Summit. And so she's actually here for a live question and answer session right after this pre-recorded session. And we are so blessed to have her. So this format is going to be a little different. You're going to watch the pre-recorded session first, followed by a live Q&A. And before we go into that, before I introduce Jordann and let you watch the video, a couple of housekeeping notes. Make sure whether you're watching this live or later, put your comments in on YouTube or on the Facebook C3EB Summit page. We will make sure that we get your questions to Jordann so that she can answer them directly. That's the least I can do. And on top of that, this summit, everything we're doing right now, would not be possible if not for our sponsors and our partners. So a huge thank you to Essential IT, our web team, Defy the Status Quo Marketing, Zanzibar Enterprises, and the Nielsen Company for walking the walk with us because they believe in this movement for equity, belongingness, and intentional inclusion. That being said, it is my absolute honor and pleasure to introduce all of you to Jordann Lankford-Forster, a Bright Trail Woman from Great Falls, Montana, who is the owner and lead facilitator at Bright Trail Education. Jordann Lankford-Forster is A'aniiih and Anishinaabe. Forster is an educator and instructional coach in Great Falls, Montana. She currently runs a dropout prevention program for high school American Indian students, or Native American students, for those of us here in Michigan, and provides curriculum, content, and diversity training to educators, community members, and national forums. And you can follow her work on her website, brighttraileducation.com. Without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to have Jordann Lankford-Forster educate us on creating more equitable representations for Indigenous populations. With that, the stage is all Jordann's videos, and we'll be back with the live question and answer. Jordann, it is such a pleasure to see you. We're going to catch up with you live right after the video. All right?
Okay, sounds great.
Yep. I think we may be having just a little bit of technical difficulty here. There it is. Or not. Give us a second, y'all. We are having some tech issues that we are resolving as we speak. Well, since they're figuring that out, Jordann, let's just start having a conversation in terms of what's going on. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome you to this, and I'm so glad you're here. I know that video is going to run. Do you want to give your own introduction of it and sort of what I've always been interested in learning from you is, yes, of course, it is incredibly important to represent Indigenous voices, no doubt. And how I found you was actually because you were all over the news in those, you know, the race talks articles, and you made some incredibly powerful, poignant like profound points. So how did all of that happen?
Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for having me. This is great. And I'm sorry that I couldn't do a live session. And so that's why I sent in the video. So I guess this just didn't start, a couple weeks ago for me or a couple months ago. Basically what happened is the whole country saw this man, George Floyd, be murdered. And what had happened was local news outlets had reached out to Indigenous people in the community, and they wanted our input for our reactions. And I guess, my biggest point of the conversation that I started having with the community was that racism doesn't just happen between Black and white people. Racism affects all minority groups, and it's important to keep in mind that when we're talking about equity and belongingness, that we just can't pigeonhole it between two groups that's going on. And I don't mean it in a way that one group's trauma or one group's historical pain is worse than another group. I just mean it as, if we're going to make equitable change, we need to include all minority groups in this conversation that we're having in the country.
And so I think we got the technical difficulties figured out. But from my perspective, I just want to add one thing before that happens is, truly speaking, Indigenous peoples, First Peoples, should not have been a minority group. History, genocide, colonization, divide and conquer, and all of the artifacts that carried on with that is what put us in this situation. And so I absolutely agree that we cannot have these conversations without representing Indigenous voices, which is why I am so beyond thankful that you agreed to do this, because I was so hyper focused and intentional when I reached out to you. I think you remember that. And I was just like, I can't do this if I don't include your voices. So thank you.
I really appreciate you taking those steps, because it's people like you that that include all voices that's going to make the change. So again, just thank you so much for including me.
Thank you. And we're ready to go with the video. So let's do this. I swear we tested this, and of course it works, but of course live issues.
Of course.
conversation. I want to be very clear before we start that this Indigenous voice is my Indigenous voice, and I am not prepared or qualified to speak on behalf of all Indigenous American people living in the United States. The beliefs that I have to share with you are my own, and I am so excited to talk to you guys during the live chat. So if we can, let's get started. So today I'm going to take you through a couple different exercises and activities as well as conversations so we can start exploring our personal biases with American people and Indigenous people of the United States, and then be reflective on how we're going to use them and where we're going to take them. So to begin with, I'd like to start with a simple exercise that I do with my classroom students as well as the teachers in our district that I train, and it all starts with Google. So if you're able to, go ahead and pull out your cell phones, or you can do this at a different time. What we're going to do is we're going to Google something, and have the image icon selected when you do it. We're going to start with is the phrase white Americans. This is a search that I did just several years ago in the middle of June, and I just want you to take a moment and be reflective of when you Google image search. So what I'm sharing with you on the screen right now is what popped up on my cell phone when I did it. So white Americans, when you image search that, just kind of take a moment, internalize what you see, what type of pictures are being shown. I'm not trying to be funny, but sometimes this is a wild card because it's either, nuclear family, or recently I've gotten some pictures of Antifa. Anyway, this is a wild card one, but just kind of take a moment, be reflective of the images that you see, the emotions that are portrayed in these images, and just how you would feel if you were someone who didn't know otherwise, wanted to learn more information on white Americans. So the next phrase that we are going to type into our Google image search is African Americans. Again, this is a screenshot from when I did this activity just a couple weeks ago back in June. And we're going to do the same thing. So we're going to look at the images that are conveyed. What are some of the emotions that are being felt in these pictures? Just a general sense of feel. So we are acting as if we are someone from another part of the world, or anyone who's just trying to get more information on African Americans. They turn to Google to do so. The third phrase that we are going to type into our Google search is Hispanic Americans. Take a moment again just to observe the images, any emotions that might be felt, the feelings that are being portrayed through these photos. You're going to image search Native Americans. This is what was portrayed on my phone when I did this activity, and I would like you to take a couple moments to observe the photos like we have been doing with our other phrases. And I want you to begin thinking about how these images are different. What are the different emotions that might be portrayed? Through the photography, how do these images differ from the other phrases that we used? Any emotions or feelings that are conveyed through these photos. Thank you for walking through that exercise with me. I do that exercise with both students and educators in our district for several reasons. First and foremost, I think it's a great way to explore bias. A lot of times people aren't surprised by the images they see when they Google Native American, because that's what they expect to see. You have these pictures of stoic natives, long hair, a lot of them have feathers. And so if you were someone, as I stated, that was hoping to gain more information about a specific group of people, what you thought you knew about them to be true is verified when we do this Google search. The stark difference for me, the biggest discrepancy between those images that I noticed is definitely the color scheme. For the other three categories that we explored before we got to Native Americans, all of those, primarily, except for one in the African American So that message that we're getting through our imagery, through media, is very intentional, because when we look at these other racial groups compared to Native Americans, it's almost as if one of those groups, that being the Native American group, the Indigenous American Indian people, don't exist anymore. All those pictures are in black and white. A lot of stereotypes are confirmed through those photos. Long hair, a lot of those pictures are accompanied with people who have regalia on or are wearing feathers. And so it's very interesting to see the differences between how other racial groups in our country have seemed to progress, while the American Indian group is still left in this stagnant, static, non-evolving category. So if you were just someone looking for more information and you decided to image search them, it's almost as if they don't exist anymore. I've had a lot of conversations with people around the United States who are not only surprised by the fact of what
so it looks like our technical difficulties are not quite going away. So I'm going to propose a radical solution. Jordann, are you here?
I am.
All right. So here's what we're going to do. Tisha, let's take the video down, and we are going to add the video to the later, to the recording, because we know the video is clear. And for whatever reason, even though we've tested this, right now, it doesn't want to cooperate. So we're going to adapt. We're going to evolve. Let's have our conversation.
Sure.
And then we'll just put the whole thing together on the recording, because I think people are actually more interested in hearing from you directly than from a pre-recorded video anyway. So this is going to be more exciting. So, I know in the video, which people are going to be able to see in the recording, but for those who are here live, it is about the inequitable representation of Indigenous populations, and about the differences between these Google searches that we see between the different, whether you want to call them racial groups, cultural groups, however you want to classify them, there are stark differences in what we see. Can you summarize that for us without using images?
Sure. I just want to preface this with how I started, my caveat for the recording is, I am not qualified. No one is qualified to speak on behalf of their racial group. And so the video that viewers will watch, I'm speaking on behalf of myself. I don't want anyone to take what I'm saying as how all American Indian people believe. I'm just speaking on behalf of myself and what I talk to my students about. So a big piece of the inequity we see is this idea, this desire to romanticize American Indian Indigenous culture. And what that does when you romanticize anything is it consolidates it to one storyline. And so the storyline that's being portrayed is that American Indian people, this warrior culture, but it consolidates them to only living it during one period of time. And so there's not a lot of, there is now, it's getting better, but there's the only representation for them that's existing in that Google search is in the past. And so what does that mean for our American Indian Indigenous people who are living today? Because you would assume a lot of times that they no longer exist. And that hurts my students because they are existing in a world that only views them in a certain way. And it's really hard for them to understand or gain, what their identity is when you live in a society that says you only existed during this time. You're not real American Indian Indigenous people.
Absolutely. And I'm sure that also actually affects the reality of American Indian or Native American students these days, because it's almost like this snapshot that got frozen in time, right? So while other people's needs have evolved into modern times, into post-internet digital ages, there's almost this misconception stereotype that when we think of Native Americans, Indigenous people, especially if they live on reservations, they're still living in these like teepee mud hut kind of, caricatures as opposed to the reality.
In some places in the country, on certain reservations, American Indian people still live in their traditional homes, which is fine. How it affects our students is through their identity as well. Is they say, okay, so you say that you're American Indian, Indigenous person, but you don't look it. And that's hard for them too, because especially if you're in an urban, it's again, kind of like you were saying, it's assuming that a group of people just is stagnant and doesn't evolve over time. And so we have students, myself included, of mixed race families, but society is saying through this imagery piece, you can only be American Indian or Indigenous if you look a certain way too. So again, that's with the long hair, feathers, and so people say that to me, they're like, oh, well, you don't look Indian, you don't look Native. And I just say, yeah, my tomahawk and my feathers wouldn't fit into my purse today, so I had to leave that at home. But it's common, and it's what our students, and I think too, that's a lot of times why people think these mascots are okay, because they don't think that they see American Indian or Indigenous people as much as they actually do, because they expect them to look a certain way so they could easily identify them if they were to see them.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I completely, I agree with that. And I meant that more in terms of, like things about, modern life where, even for those who live in traditional Native American homes, whatever they are, they still function in modern society,
For basic survival purposes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I feel like, as obvious as that point seems, when you shared this with me, and like what was coming up in my mind was, wow, how many people miss that obvious point? That these are still, like, these are our contemporaries. These are not some kind of like multiverse, alternate universe living people.
Right, absolutely. And just kind of along those same lines, I think that the states in the Western Plains get that a lot too. A lot of people genuinely ask, are we still riding horses to school and stuff like that? Some kids do, that's fine. But just this idea that cultures stop evolving and they're not adaptive is so wrong, because that's the number one key to resiliency and survival, is your ability to adapt and evolve throughout time. And if you're taking pieces, traditional pieces, and weaving them into you driving a car to work, that doesn't make you any less American Indian or Indigenous. This is America, and you can take those pieces that are important to you and weave them into modern society, and that doesn't change your identity. That doesn't change who you are. It doesn't change who your grandparents were.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you talk about that cultural piece, because actually this evolution and adaptation is a technical requirement of something being a culture versus a cult.
Absolutely.
And so I think that's also a point that a lot of people miss. So I'm really thankful that you made that point very salient, about the critical need for us to recognize that just as we evolve, why wouldn't we expect other communities to evolve? Why are we holding on to these stereotypes?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so, you know, I know you're, I mean, I told you this, I had goosebumps through that entire video. So can you, for those of us who are tuned in now, of course, they're going to watch the video later, but let's tie it into the work that you do with Bright Trail Education and the critical need for it and the importance of people supporting these types of initiatives, supporting people like you who are doing such a huge service in an area that has been underrepresented, under-resourced, and really, really marginalized even by our federal government.
So really, and also with the focal point of the video that viewers will watch, our main purpose is to help create a positive climate and culture, whether it be in the classroom or the community, for everybody. Because from an educator's perspective, when we are examining imagery and examining this whole mascot debate, we cannot, as educators, we have a moral responsibility to teach all perspectives and all sides of the story, not just one. And that's my point in this video, especially with the mascots, is we cannot perpetuate these stereotypes as educators, because we need to teach students both sides of the story. And it's just not educationally sound for us to stereotype groups of people and then share that with our students and have them think that that's okay, or have them think that one purpose or one person's sole identity lies in this one-dimensional character.
Absolutely. Let me ask you this, and this is sort of selfish, because it's more like, you know, I'm curious about, you know, this too. And for me, my personal curiosity goes back to, you know, what you and I talked about on our calls about, well, to put it blankly, Columbus being a drunk fool, first of all. And then, you know, just the misnaming and all of that. But there is an interesting aspect of, because of that, I do feel like, you know, there is a pull for me to understand this entire multiple cultures of a giant continent of a people, so that we, you know, I can do my part in helping them and helping support them represent themselves, because I don't need to represent you. I don't need to speak for any Native American person. All I want to do is, you know, so my question really, long story short, is how can what can we, as people who haven't experienced this culture, who aren't a part of this heritage, what can we do to support? What can we do to honestly support, uplift, to shine the light on the issues, and to help highlight voices like yours in not just this conversation, but other conversations too?
So absolutely don't Google image search American Indian.
I already made that mistake.
Right there. You know, there's 574 federally recognized American Indian tribes in the United States. And there's several hundred more that are not federally recognized yet. But I would say that there's plenty of opportunity to find Indigenous people close to your community and just do some outreach. And the biggest piece, and what we're talking about today, is listening. Just listening to their voices. And again, I cannot speak on behalf of all American Indian people, just as no individual that you contact can, but just getting a varied group together and just listening to their stories and listening to what they have to say. If you have questions about, so what do you guys need? Because we're all over the country. Different groups need different things. But it's the same thing in education when we try to make these rules or these expectations for our students. We're missing the student voice from that. And that's what I would say that's similar for our different minority groups is we really need to bring more to the table when we're having these conversations, because we can make all of the rules and expectations for the students, but it's really hard to enforce those rules if the student's voice isn't at the table either. As an educator, if I say, be here by 8:30 to school, and they don't have a ride, and I don't know that, now they're getting in trouble for something that they're not in control in. And sorry for kind of going on a bird walk with that, but really just sitting down and listening without assumptions for what American Indian people need, because it's also an assumption that all American Indian people are in these dire third world economic status of life. We have American Indian doctors and lawyers. We have 2 American Indian congresswomen right now. And so I think it's just getting a collective group together and listening just to broaden the story and not keeping it in this one-dimensional fictional caricature.
Absolutely. And that's actually what I meant earlier by when I said, there's these stereotypes of people still living in what, non-Native Americans know as teepees and, all of this other stuff. Is there really is this, I feel like, disconnect that people don't understand. Like, Native First Peoples are still a part of us. They've just been rendered invisible.
Absolutely. And that's my goal as an educator, and in my dropout prevention class is to make sure that my students know that they're not important because their ancestors existed in the past. They are important because they are heartbeats in my room that exist today, and they have a place in our contemporary society, and they are just as important as anybody else, and they have value simply because Creator put them here, and their lives are important.
Absolutely. I have goosebumps. Said, in this entire summit, I've had so many goosebumps. But thank you for saying that, and thank you for speaking on behalf of the kids of the next generation. That is a huge part of why I wanted to do the summit, because it's not about those of us who are anywhere between like 40 to 70, because in many ways we are adult enough to be able to address our own needs and to be able to speak up. Speaking up at that point, is really a matter of agency. But when it comes to the next generation, when it comes to kids, when it comes to minors, who don't have their full rights, they need advocacy. And that's really what the underlying thing for me about this is, because I have a 4-year-old, and granted, she thinks she's 40, but she can't really actually speak for herself. And so that's really who I'm thinking of, when I created this. Well, all of that being said, the reason I was saying all of that is, can you, and I know you're not speaking for all Native Americans across all 574 federally recognized, and then a few hundred that are not tribes, but overall, there are some persistent myths that harm First Peoples as a whole. You know what I mean? Just in terms of the history, in terms of the way, formal education history books and curriculums treat it, all of it, in terms of the lack of representation across, what are some of these, and how do we go about dismantling these things that are actually harming entire cultures?
Right. So I would say in terms of how history has been taught in the past needs to be changed. That's part of our jobs as instructional coaches for our districts, because the bottom line is the narrative of these of this storyline is that Native American, American Indian, Indigenous peoples were conquered. And don't get me wrong, that's different than losing a battle. But to be conquered means that we wouldn't exist anymore, is what it means. And I don't want my children to, just get this one side of history and think that they were conquered. And that's what I tell them, is because if you were truly conquered, you wouldn't exist anymore. And again, that's different than losing a battle. It means that American Indian people have a resiliency that I think it's unprecedented, the fact that American Indian people are still here today. And I think that, again, along those lines of the history books, is people really need to re-examine American Indian federal policy. Because if you have issues with how you think American Indian people are living their lives, or you just don't understand why they can't sometimes pull themselves up by their bootstraps, there needs to be a real examination of American Indian federal policy and how this group of people was treated through the beginning with the colonialization period, because you will understand in many cases how we've gotten to the points that we've gotten when you tell the full story of history in its entirety instead of just from one perspective. And I get it. As a history teacher myself, our history books are written to inspire patriotism, which I think is very important. I think that the United States is the greatest country in the world. That is my opinion. And so it's meant to inspire patriotism amongst its readers, which is understandable. But you have to be historically accurate always, instead of just verifying one side of the story. Because again, if American Indian people were fully conquered, that would mean that they were an ancient or an extinct society, and they're not.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's really powerful.
Thank you.
So we are, like I said, we are going to add all of this. We're going to take out all of the technical difficulty part, and we're going to add the rest of it to your video so that we can share it with everybody. And of course, we're going to share it with you. So, we want to get this out to as many people as possible. Do you have any kind of final parting thoughts on just all of everything that we've talked about? Because I have so many more questions. We're definitely going to have continued conversations about this, because I think this is just the opening. This is just really just that opening of the rabbit hole. And this is not something that we can cover in a span of 40 minutes, 50 minutes. These are ongoing conversations that should never stop, because we have to constantly examine our biases, re-examine them, examine the stereotypes we're operating under, and do active work to keep dismantling this and dismantling the white supremacy that got us to this position. So, given all of that, what are your final thoughts for today, Jordann? I would love to hear them.
Well, so I just want to say that I know that there are great people out there, and so I'm of a mixed race family, and I think the most important thing, I guess, the problem in our country right now is that everybody's so down to debate, because everybody wants to be right. And I think it's important to remember that multiple truths can be happening at once. And people don't like that because we want the finalization of this is right and this is wrong. And I think that people need to get used to the idea that multiple truths, multiple layers are always behind a problem or an issue. And so the beginning stages of that are dialogue. We're not debating, so one of us can be right and one of us can be wrong. We are dialoguing so that we are listening to understand each other better. Does everyone have to agree with everything that I say? No, because this is the United States and everybody has a right to their opinion. But what's going to bring us closer together as a country is if we're just willing to listen to each other, not because we're going to get a final answer, but listen to understand each other better. And I just really want to thank the participants and you know, as a host for putting this on and putting in the work, for having me to start those initial stages. It's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, again, I apologize for the technical difficulties. They happen. We have no control over them.
Absolutely. Get it. As a teacher, you just gotta, you know, computer's not working, something's not working. You just gotta roll.
Exactly.
So I
made that executive decision of let's stop this. We're just going to have this conversation because that's going to be a lot more powerful than listening to a video that doesn't have sound. So thank you so much, Jordann and or Bright Trail Woman. I don't know which one you prefer, or both. Thank you so much. We are definitely going to continue this conversation. So for all of our listeners, definitely expect to see Jordann Lankford-Forster, Bright Trail Woman, back to have those Indian to Indian heart-to-heart conversations that I alluded to yesterday when we were talking to Rose Bear Don't Walk, who Jordann introduced me to. So I'm so thankful for that as well.
You guys got to connect. Can I give a quick shout out?
Yeah.
I got to shout out to my business partner, Miranda Murray. She's the one who put the video together for me. And she's just, she's an instructional coach with me in our district, but she also works alongside me with our business. And she does a really, really great job. And, you know, I need to thank her. So
yeah, absolutely. And when you guys watch this video, you'll know what I mean, like when I say she's exceptionally skilled at this, because that video was so powerful and so beautiful and so well put together. She really did an exceptional job. I'd love to talk to her too. So, you know, let's all connect and we'll make this happen. Absolutely. But for now, thank you so much. And thank you to all of our listeners live and those watching later. Promise you we'll get that video out to you so that you can actually see the power of what Jordann created and Jordann and Miranda created on this video. From the bottom of my heart, Jordann, thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll talk soon.
Okay, sounds great.
Bye.
Bye.